Now, this week, the UK's independent advisory body on climate change issued a stark warning that we need to be prepared to cope with weather extremes as a result of at least 2 degrees Celsius of global warming by 2050. In a letter to the government, the Climate Change Committee said the country was not yet adapted to worsening weather extremes already occurring at current levels of warming, let alone what was expected to come. The letter came in the same week the World Meteorological Organization confirmed that 2024 had seen a record rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Today we're asking, are we ready for the impact of climate change? Well, joining me to discuss this are Melanie Nazareth from Christian Climate Action, Nathaniel Ogunniyi, a political consultant from Young Voices, Andy Mayer from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Dr. Kush Narka, a campaigner and doctor. Welcome to you all. Good to see you. Nathaniel, I'll start with you. In this report in April, the Climate Change Committee said preparations here for rising temperatures were either too slow, stalled, or heading in the wrong direction. I mean, that doesn't sound great. How prepared are we for the impact of climate change?
Well, I think it's an important question, but I think we have quite some way to go in terms of preparing for climate change. I think net zero policy isn't helpful as it stands. So current net zero policy pushes us to do lots of things that are unhelpful for climate change or the environment. So I'll give you 2 examples. There's one around oil and gas. So we are now under Labour banning the extraction of oil and gas from North Sea fields. Those are within the UK. Now we're going to import that from abroad. But imported stuff is 4 times worse. So net zero policy, which is pushing us to do those imports, is making the environment as a whole worse, right? So I think we can see that net zero policy isn't sort of really working for the environment. But I think there are solutions to these issues, right? If we have cheap power, if we have nuclear, if we have sustainable British energy, if we have energy from some renewables, I think we can get there.
So there are ways, but not the way we're doing it now. Kush, could see you shaking your head there. Obviously not in agreement.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm an infectious disease doctor working in the NHS. 3 years ago, when the summer heat wave happened, 2 major London NHS hospitals had their data centres break down. So hundreds of patients had their operations cancelled, including cancer patients, and that's already happening with the global warming.
Why did that happen?
This was 2022 in the summer heat wave.
I see.
So that's already happening because of extreme weather events that are happening in the UK that we are not prepared for. The thing that keeps me up at night is actually things like dengue. That is a potentially deadly viral infection that the cases worldwide have been doubling every decade for the last 30 years. And now we're actually seeing cases, and this is because it's spread by mosquitoes who like the heat and are spreading further and faster. We're now seeing cases in the north of France this summer just gone. It's only a matter of time until they come to the UK, and the NHS is not prepared. It's going to threaten our health system.
Yeah, so Andy, that's just like thinking about the NHS. I mean, these are the diseases that you just think of in much hotter countries. You never think of them coming here, really, in a big way. But how do we communicate the risk that we have from climate change and the impact, and communicate that without scaring people and getting people on board without sort of making them feel fatigued, like, oh, well, I can't achieve any of this?
So it's a great question, and the centre of that analysis is, are any of these problems helped or hindered by the focus on climate change? So, for example, we do have people who've been thinking about the risk of infectious diseases from tropical climes in this country, who've been there for decades and have been looking at those problems and trying to work out how we are best prepared. Because, frankly, as a much richer country than the countries that suffer dengue fever, we are better able to cope. And we're better able to cope because we have the kind of brilliance that leads to things like the response to COVID. So if we ever did have a situation where some of these things came over, we would come up with ways of solving them because we are better off. And if we're focusing on climate in a way that's hindering that, that's the problem.
So, Melanie, when you hear Andy, you know, we're a rich country, we've got great expertise, we'll get out of it. Does that fill you with confidence?
Absolutely not. The thing about climate change is it is the most serious problem facing humanity at the moment, globally, but also in this country. And one of the things that the Climate Change Committee said, and it's borne out also because Aviva, insurers, not politicians, not climate campaigners, recently released a report that said climate change is really serious. We need very urgent action. And that action is in 2 parts. We need to cut emissions. So the focus on net zero is vital because we've got to cut emissions. But alongside that, we have to work out how we adapt to this. And we might be a rich country, Andy, but we're not doing it. The scientists are warning of it, business like Aviva, politicians like the Climate Change Committee. We have to take this seriously. As a person of faith, I think I can say this on a Sunday programme. I stand with the Pope. Pope Francis and Pope Leo have both said now is the time to abandon fossil fuels because of the harm that they are doing to the planet. And that's got to be the first step.
I mean, Nathaniel, you talked about the money. So earlier on, Kunsberg, the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, it's a long old title, isn't it? Ed Miliband, we know, has that role, said bills are high because of our reliance on fossil fuels. Clean energy is the way to reduce bills. So what Kush and Melanie are kind of talking about, it's actually cheaper if we do it.
So I suppose if you look at the policy that Ed Miliband has put out for the latest round of renewables auctions. So renewable power sort of brought in large backs.
I'm not talking about the specifics of policy, just overall, if we go down the path of green energy, that is going to be cheaper in the long run. Maybe not today, not tomorrow, but in a few years' time.
I suppose
Do you agree with that?
We need power for our industry in order to make those innovations, right? So you need a lot of electricity for loads of things that are good for the environment, whether that's heat pumps, whether that's electric vehicles, whether that's recycling, which takes a lot of energy. All of those things which are good for climate change require lots of energy, right? And so you can't get that cheap energy if you focus on, for instance, biomass, which is now imported from the States as part of our net zero policy. But that's dirtier than coal. It's dirtier than coal. It's dirtier than coal. It's more expensive, so there's no reason we should be using it.
Kush.
There are already more fossil fuel projects up and running and active that will blow us past any of the climate budget, carbon budgets that we set out to trying to meet. If we want to have any hope of meeting those goals, we need to stop investing in new fossil fuels.
Andy?
I mean, it's very simple. We've been doing this for 25 years now. We are leading the world in investment in things like renewable energy. And the result of that is we have the most expensive industrial energy in the world and the second most expensive electricity. The result of that high energy price is that everything is more expensive. We have a cost of living or a cost of Miliband crisis, as some have said this week. And what that means is everything that we try and do, including the transition to other forms of energy in different systems, is getting slower and harder. So if we want to solve climate change in the long run, we need to focus on productivity and getting things down cheap, particularly energy.
So, Melanie, lots of people will be watching this and they'll have heard this for years. Actually, it can feel quite difficult as an individual. You sort of think, well, what difference can I make? And I mean, actually, so Piers Foster from the committee, this climate change committee, he said it is possible to meet our carbon budgets for 2030 and 2050, provided we take steps forward on policy. I mean, that gives people hope, doesn't it? Do you feel hopeful about that?
We have to have hope because we need to have hope to act and to get out of this situation.
But do you agree
that
it's
hope has
possible?
got to be rooted in reality? And so, yes, it is possible, but it requires these really serious steps, and it requires them from our politicians and from our business leaders and even from our faith leaders. And our role and why we can have hope is we need to hold them to account. We need to get engaged in this whole debate on our personal level as individuals.
Should we, Kush, be tweaking, sort of like an in-game changing of policy, like it's half-time in the match and we realise that maybe we're not going to hit the targets that we aim for? Let's change our aims and actually think about, also stopping the impact of climate change. It's going to happen. We're not going to reach the targets that we set sort of 10 years ago or so. Should we be just changing the
We need to change our goals, but we need to double down on decarbonising. That's what we need to do. We need to, at the same time, be reducing the amount of pollution that we're producing, as well as adapting to the change that is inevitably going to happen.
Yeah. What about the perception? Do you feel that the messaging that is out there, that we hear in the media, do you think it's right, it's the right level, it scares people perhaps?
I think some of the messaging can be difficult for people to stomach. I think high electricity bills can be even harder for people to stomach, right? 12.1 million people in this country struggle to pay their electricity bills, right? A big part of that, 40% of the cost of generating electricity comes from carbon taxes, comes from other things related to renewables. So I think that is really important. But on the decarbonisation point, I think it is important that we look at things like nuclear. So for instance, in South Korea, they use nuclear, their nuclear costs a sixth of the cost of our nuclear. In Finland, it's half the cost of our nuclear. So if we want decarbonised cheap energy, there are solutions out there.
Yeah.
I mean, just very simply on the decarbonisation point, if the UK achieved 100% decarbonisation tomorrow, global emissions would still increase. So it won't make any difference whatsoever.
So that's not very helpful at all.
But if we go to the purpose of the report, which is about adaptation and how we prepare for the consequences of a warmer world, then the best thing to do is to look at how you can localise action as much as possible. So if we take the example of one of the original reports that came out at the time of it, Tenbury Wells. This is a place which is surrounded by a river and has experienced severe flooding events repetitively over the last 10 years. And they have asked the government to give them money in order to build flood defences. And the government has taken a very long time to say no because the costs has increased by about 6 times. Now there, it looks to me like the government is trying to make an example of Tenbury Wells rather than do the action that they need to do in order to provide the defences they need.
So allow them to flood so they then can say it's worse than it actually is.
It's been described as the town that could be abandoned for climate change.
I don't think that's right. I don't think that's what the government is doing, but it would be immoral.
Obviously,
it would also be immoral to do that. But the good news is that actually we do need to decarbonise because we need to be leaders, global leaders. But the solutions for decarbonisation and for resilience and adaptation are often the same. Yeah. So if we were to insulate our housing stock, we would take big steps to decarbonisation and we would build resilient societies. As we move to renewable energy and do it fast, we build jobs and resilience again, and less dependence on overseas sources of power. We build our energy security.
And so that's what, say, leaders can do to bring in, say, getting rid of boilers and bringing in green energy in.
Yes.
What can individuals do?
So individuals really need to do 2 things. One is to look at their lifestyle changes, but really, really importantly is that we as individuals need to get involved in the political process. We need to say to our MPs, look, this is not good enough. This is what we want you to do. We want you to protect our futures by taking action now. And that is the most important thing, I think, that individuals can do.
Yeah.
Can I just add that...
Very quickly,
on the cost of energy, actually, fossil fuels have received more subsidies in the last decade than renewables have. And if you just want to look at bringing down the cost, actually, if you, were a water company and you wanted to bring down costs, they do that by pouring sewage into our waterways.
Okay,
right?
well, that's
another point, but it's very similar. You know, oil and gas is only cheaper because you don't think of the costs associated with poisoning the air that we breathe.
Okay, I can see Nathaniel shaking his head, but we have no time to come back to you. Thank you all very much indeed.